All right, hello. Welcome to Civics Review number 1. We're going to go through as much stuff as we can, as quickly as we can. So the first thing is, what is civics? Civics is the study of citizenship and government. A citizen being the subject of that government. We're going to get into a whole bunch. Right now, the first thing we'll look at with our actual government is the founding principles of it. But in order to know that, we have to know that why the government actually exists. One, it has to make laws. Two, it needs to keep order. It needs to provide services. And obviously, prevents anarchy because the absence of government is anarchy. So keeping order. So levels of government. This levels of government is going to be known as federalism. One of the principles used in American government. And that is that divide between a federal government, a state government, and then if you want to get lower, we can go to local government, which we'll talk about a whole bunch more in a couple of weeks. So, national level, federal government, that's the top one. The supremacy clause in the Constitution is what's going to make this the most important to us. The state, of course, is going to deal with more of the things we deal with on a daily basis, and local even more so. Like state will have, and if we're looking at our Constitution, our federal government is any powers that are actually listed within the Constitution. These would be enumerated powers, or expressed powers, or delegated powers. All of these mean the same thing, and that just means they're expressly written out. State is going to have the implied powers, and those are the things that are not written there, and they're, according to our 10th Amendment, saved for the state. And anything that's done by both of them is done concurrently. So concurrent powers are done by both. Things like taxing. So this is what our levels of government do and why they're so important to the United States. And we will, as I said, look further and further at this, especially as we go into our branches of government and our state and local government, and some of the things that our government actually does. So we end up, as we move into our the events of American history, we're going to end up having to choose our own government, because the government that we came out of was a monarchy, and the monarch itself ends up changing, or the monarchy changes over time. Initially, it's an absolute monarchy, and an absolute monarchy, the king, queen, does whatever they want. There's no regulations in any way, but this will change in 1215 in England with the Magna Carta. Magna Carta is going to be put in place in order to give powers to citizens. Once again, it'll change even more in 1688 with the Glorious Revolution. So this will lead to a limited or even constitutional monarchy. Constitutional in the sense that when you guys looked at some of the world constitutions, the Magna Carta is still used today and has been updated over and over again. Well, when it comes to what things that we end up using, we're going to take several influences. In the United States, we'll take democracy, and democracy, of course, is influenced by the Greeks, and direct democracy had been used initially. We can look at this as being our popular sovereignty type of section within our style of government where people actually vote for things. But we don't really use direct democracy very much except for at a local level. We use more of a representative democracy. We're a republic where we have people to represent us within our federalized government of various levels. There's also different forms that we take little elements of. As no nation is fully capitalist, no nation is fully socialist, and we have a little bit of that. And socialism is that equality for the people, but of course socialism, that will be run by the people, public ownership of lands and the like. Communism, another form, which can, of course, easily become very corrupt, where the government themselves will own everything for the sake of the people, the means of production. A dictatorship, as I said, corruption can come out of that. We've looked at several types, totalitarian and authoritarian, with examples like Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, where these powerful dictators end up taking control of everything in one's life. Fascism being government ownership of everything for the sake of the government. Many of these forms of government are actually oligarchies, and an oligarchy is a control by a small select few. Theocracy, another type that we looked at, several of you chose for your project, is the operating of a nation by a religion. So, as we said that we would be looking at some of these American colonies, bringing us into our eventual American independence, the American colonies themselves divided up into several different regions. Let's go over quickly with that PowerPoint that is available on our Canvas page some of the important quick things. Our first successful government in America is Jamestown. In Jamestown, of course, they become successful because of the farming of tobacco and the sale of that to Europe. But they end up eventually through their use of the royal colony, proprietary colony, these different type of colonies. The main goal of most of the reason people come to America, sure, we think of the religious freedom of the Massachusetts Bay Colony with the Pilgrims and the Puritans, but money. In Jamestown, as Jamestown becomes very successful, it's going to lead to our first representative form of government in the United States, and that is the House of Burgesses. In the House of Burgesses, a burgess itself is a representative. These representatives, one for every county or shire, and we think back to American History 1, of course there ends up being the problem as it grows and grows and grows, leading to neglect, leading to Bacon's Rebellion, which will end up concluding with the ending of indentured servitude in America. But reasons we said people would come, wealth, hence in Jamestown, religious dissent, possibly royal colonies chartered by the monarchy. But if we're talking about religious dissent, we know the two groups, as I said just a moment ago, were Pilgrims and Puritans. And the Pilgrims were Massachusetts Bay Colony, also known as separatists, because they wanted to separate from England. The Puritans themselves being the godly, they were the group that wanted to change the church from within. Now, the importance of both of these to colonial America, to leading into the United States, is that the Pilgrims themselves, they had the Mayflower Compact that they created. And the Mayflower Compact, which we read in class, was, while very short, the first attempt at a real popular sovereignty within the Americas. They wrote, before they even landed, a letter saying that they were going to self-govern. The Puritans, well, they lead to many other nations coming together, or other states being created as they send others out of their colony. But one of the governing leaders of the Puritans within the Massachusetts Bay Colony was John Winthrop, who wrote his City Upon a Hill, which describes American exceptionalism, and is important because it shows that America, we're always going to be focused on trying to be that city upon a hill, which we'll see more in some of the other colonies that advocate for things like religious freedom, which will carry over into everything. But we know that our Puritans, as they push people out, will eventually lead to the settlement of New Hampshire as a royal colony. It'll lead to Rhode Island. Roger Williams is going to end up being exiled and creating a colony that actually has religious freedom and a good relationship with the American Indian. Connecticut by Thomas Hooker. Connecticut's important because Connecticut's going to have our first written constitution in the Americas. New York will end up being purchased by the Dutch, of course under the duress of war, but New Jersey comes out of that. Delaware. We end up moving into our areas. We have more of a diverse group of people, like in Pennsylvania, where it's home to many different immigrants, Swedish, Dutch, English, Scots, Irish, German. This is a farming community. It's set up by the Quakers, William Penn, Pennsylvania, and they set up their capital is Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, where all people were possessed with an inner light and equality, and this is the state that we really would think of as being kind of a representation of what America should become. Virginia, we already said some of the important things there. It was set up by the Virginia Company, though, is money, and that's going to also end up leading to our French and Indian War. Maryland is set up for the purpose of religious freedom for Catholics. Now, the problem here is that while it's set up for initially for religious freedom, is that the Protestants start to overwhelm this, the Catholics feel that they're oppressed, and then it ends up leading to a document called the Maryland Proclamation, Maryland Toleration Act, which calls for religious freedom for Catholics. And the Maryland Act of Toleration is, while only giving freedom to one group of people, is going to set that in motion for religious freedom throughout all of the colonies. Carolina, set up in 1653, one huge colony, ends up being split up in 1670 by population, South Carolina being a smaller population, larger population, smaller landmass, because it's split in half, and it's the better agricultural area. So it's initially set up for money. If we're going down even lower, now into Georgia, our southernmost colony at the time, is set up as a debtor's prison and kind of a buffer zone between Florida and the rest of the American colonies. So those are our colonies as quickly as we could do them. Let's now look at some of the things that happened leading to conflict in our colonies. So the conflict in our colonies, as we said, there was a buffer zone between between the Carolinas and Florida with Georgia. Now, we also had problems in the United States with the Native Americans, dealing with land and religion and constant warfare throughout these new colonies. This is also going to cost a lot of money to England, but England is using this as a financial venture, and leading up to the French and Indian War 100 years earlier, English power is focused on mercantilism. Mercantilism being one of those very important vocabulary words here. And mercantilism, if we want to look at this as really being as simple as we can, all things go through England, but imports will be offset by exports. This is a favorable balance of trade. More things sold than are bought, making more money, but along with this mercantilism, to make sure that England gets the most money possible, in the 1660s, the Navigation Acts are going to be put forward. This is going to be taxes on things like sugar, molasses, rum, with our Molasses Act, which is going to be an incredibly high tax. But the real issue here is that colonists refuse to pay it. It's going to be things like the Staples Act, which forces colonists to use English ships, and then all goods have to go through London to make sure that they're getting their money. Now, in 1688, as Parliament forces the king out of office and Parliament gains strength, there's going to be a little bit of a tighter grasp taken on the colonies, but not so much that ends up ending the salutary neglect. So let's fast forward, all this self-governing still going on because of the salutary neglect, and into the French and Indian War. So in 1754, Benjamin Franklin is going to propose the Albany Plan of Union, or the Albany Congress. And this is going to be done where colonial leaders and the Iroquois leaders are going to get together and have this idea of possibly joining together or we're all going to die. So 22 years before we even declare our independence, there's still the idea that we're one nation all together. While it is rejected, no treaty is actually drawn up. We have this going through the war. Now let's fast forward through the war. And 9 years of war, nothing said about it, and it ends in 1763 with the Treaty of Paris. The British are going to double the size of the Americas. They've gained influence, they've pushed the French out of the New World, but the real problem is, in this French and Indian War, is it costs a lot of money. There's gained tensions, and the Royal Proclamation line of 1763 is going to be drawn. One, to keep the colonists from fighting the American Indians, and also because, well, we need to keep track of debt as England focuses on the colonies. So let's look at some of these parliamentary acts and what they do. So, starting in 1764, the Sugar Act is going to tax sugar, molasses, and rum, just like the Molasses Act, only now they've greatly reduced the amount of taxes that are being done. Now, with reduction of these taxes, they're hoping that people will actually pay them. They're going to be enforced with the writs of assistance. The writs of assistance allow British troops that are there to search and seize any goods off of people that they deem necessary. No warrant. Quartering Act, those guys who are going to stay here the following year, you're forced to keep them in your home and feed them, or your business, more likely your business. The Stamp Act is going to be done in 1765. And this is going to be a tax that affects everyone. All paper goods, all licenses, anything important is going to have a stamp fixed to it, and people are going to be charged for it. It impacts all of the colonists, especially the poor. Now, this makes people in the colonies upset, which is going to lead to our first real Congress in the colonies, the Stamp Act Congress. The Stamp Act Congress is going to get together, they're going to make their grievances known, and it's going to lead to Parliament actually repealing this the following year in 1766. You can't just take away all of these new acts that are being put together, so the Declaratory Act is going to be issued the next year. The Declaratory Act is where Parliament says that they can just tax at any point, and that Parliament's orders are the number one top priority, and that colonies have to abide by them. So, that said, the next year, the Townshend Acts are going to be put in place. The Townshend Acts, they tax more luxury items. They tax things like glass, they tax things like lead, they tax things like paint. So it's not going to impact everyone. Well, fast forward 3 more years from the Townshend Acts being put in place, and you get a bunch of people who are unhappy. And so the Boston Massacre is going to happen. The Boston Massacre, we looked at that picture in class, and we know that the story and the image don't exactly match up, as it was several angry young men leaving a pub, and then there's a fight and there's gunshots, but the actual propaganda makes it look a lot more like peaceful citizens and upper class men are just being shot by organized soldiers. So the reactions that come out of this, James Otis, one of the founding fathers, ends up coming up with our rallying cry for the revolution with no taxation without representation. The British disagree because we have virtual representation, or Englishmen sitting out there and representing us. Sons of Liberty will start to organize boycotts, committees of correspondence happen, where now the colonies are all talking to each other, they create non-importation acts, and everything is kind of coming to a head. After the Townshend Acts were repealed, the Tea Act remains in place, but a monopoly was given to the East India Trading Company, which leads to the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party happens when Sons of Liberty throw millions of dollars worth of tea overboard, burn the ships, and then Boston is punished. They're punished with the Coercive Acts, where England feels that they're coercing the colonists into following the rules, but the colonists believe these to be intolerable acts. The same acts, different perception of what they are. Here's where Boston is shut down as a harbor, so Boston's not bringing in money. There's martial law put in place where a military governor will then rule over Boston, and all sorts of punishments happen. So in 1774, September, the First Continental Congress will be called together. The First Continental Congress is going to make decisions like to boycott all British goods, to put together a militia, or the Minutemen, and then mate 1 year later. Now, they're not going to last a year before the next meeting. The loyalties are divided, and some people want independence, a third of people want to remain part of the crown, and a third of people just don't care. Look at what brought the colonists from that, deciding to wait just another year before calling a Second Continental Congress, and making it start early. Well, the thing that happened was there was the shot heard around the world. In April of 1775, Lexington and Concord. Now, this isn't one place. Lexington and Concord are two places about 30 minutes driving apart from each other. British try to seize weapons in Concord. In Concord, there's an arsenal. Paul Revere, William Dawes, Samuel Prescott, these people who think about as like founding father figures within the Sons of Liberty, they are going to ride out and warn people. Now, Paul Revere, of course, is the one we usually think of because, one, well, you know, he's important. He carved the Boston Massacre, wood carving that was put into the newspapers, but also because he was in a poem, and that's what sticks. But he doesn't make it as far as some of the other ones. But they go, they warn colonists, the Minutemen come, and then at Lexington they meet. Shots are fired, colonists are killed, and the war begins. The colonists are going to engage in guerrilla warfare, and they're going to have to put together a Second Continental Congress. So in May of 1775, they start to organize a little bit. And George Washington is going to be appointed as the leader because he has a great experience from having fought in the French and Indian War. He may not have been the best leader during the French and Indian War, but right now he's the most experienced and best they've got. So they bring him together, and he's going to be a very competent leader. There's some talk of more compromise. It's going to lead to writing out some plans as to how to reunite and not have to declare independence. Bunker Hill happens, the next large, huge battle in 1775, June. The colonists are going to take the hill overlooking Boston, which isn't actually Bunker Hill, it's actually Breed's Hill. But as the British charge over and over 3 times, colonists will continue firing at them up until the point where they run out of ammunition. While the colonists technically lose this because they retreat, and that's really how you determine who wins or loses a battle back then, the British lose a great number of their soldiers. This is the most costly battle of the entire Revolution, and it happens before independence has been declared. Following this, the colonists feel pretty good. They may have lost this, but it was definitely destructive to England. So Congress decides to write up the Olive Branch Petition. And the Olive Branch Petition, which we looked at a little bit in class, of course has the language that it sounds like it's a bit sucking up to the king. It's where they ask to end the war, return to normal, keep their salutary neglect in a way, and have peace. But this is a couple of victories for the English. So the king is going to write back his own response, which is much shorter than the Olive Branch Petition, doesn't really have any punctuation or anything like that in it, and he's going to refuse peace. He's going to say that he's going to put this rebellion down quickly and make an example of them. Well, the war is going to continue. In January of 1776, Thomas Paine is going to end up publishing a pamphlet that he's written. This pamphlet is going to be read by like 1 million people. I believe somewhere around 20% of colonists actually have this. 1 in 5, that's a lot of people to read a pamphlet. Those who can't read have it read to them. This is read publicly, and it's going to make the argument that it makes no sense that a small island across the ocean is leading this huge land of many colonists. It just doesn't have any common sense. So it's going to continue pushing this. Thomas Paine publishes this anonymously as an Englishman. Once again, drive further point home that this is an Englishman saying that the colonists have no reason to be colonies. They should have independence. So this is urging people. It's not only sold well in the colonies, but also in England. So in June of 1776, Richard Henry Lee is going to propose Lee's resolution, the Resolution of Independence. And in it, all it really says is that the colonies need to leave England. That's it. We read it. It's short. It says nothing. So they table it. And then over the next month, the Committee of Five is going to write the Declaration. That Declaration, written by Thomas Jefferson, edited by Congress, is going to come through and be approved on July 4th, 1776. Our independence is declared. The war has changed. So a lot of the ideas taken from it we looked at with our philosophers, most of them with John Locke, life, liberty, property, health becomes life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. There's also a proposal for self-governing and things like that in there. So we're looking at Hobbes, Locke, Montesquieu, Rousseau. The main things to think about here, Hobbes, strength and protection for the people. Locke, tabula rasa. But also the idea that the government's there to protect it, and it's okay to overthrow the government if necessary because they're not protecting your natural rights, keeping your social contract. Rousseau believes that we're naturally good, and he believed in popular sovereignty or direct democracy. And Montesquieu is going to be the one who pushes for us to have separation of powers. So those are the most important things to know about those four Enlightenment thinkers that we read things from. Now, the war is really going. We're not going to focus much more on the actual war, but let's look at what our governing was. So the first one we put together is, in the United States, the Articles of Confederation. That's our first actual governing document in the United States. The first section is where it declares our name as the United States of America and says we're a confederacy. Confederacy being independent independent nations operating together under a loose operation together. We operate as a league of friendship. Each of the 13 colonies has their own 13 different governments, separation of powers within them. A lot of the same structures that we have today, only there's not really the unity. And the real problem with our Articles of Confederation is that our federal government is very, very weak. Now, the reason we needed to put it together is because it was a Revolutionary War. We need this operating together. During the Revolution, you have an army. There's no standing peacetime army under the Articles of Confederation, but during the war, they can't operate it. Now, we have a one-house legislature, unicameral, one chamber. That means one vote is for each state. If they're going to pass any laws, 9 out of 13 have to approve it. If they're going to actually amend the Articles of Confederation, it has to be unanimous. So it's very difficult. The real powers of the federal government here is operate in military and war and write treaties, which is going to be important during the war and ending the war, but not much beyond that, because the federal government can't enforce laws. There's no executive branch. They can't tax. Taxes have to be given voluntarily to the federal government by states. There's no court system, no judicial branch, nothing that can actually judge what's happening. There's no regulation of trade, which causes a lot of problems when it comes to trade between the states and if they want to have their own different tariffs put in place. And the final straw with the Articles of Confederation happens with Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion, we watched that video, is where a short rebellion of farmers should be very, very short, put over very quickly, but instead it's long-lasting, could have gone the other way, and finally, when it's put down, they decide they actually need to rewrite the whole thing. Ironic thing is that they're rebelling against people like Samuel Adams, who doesn't agree with the same types of strategies that they're using as people did in the Revolution. So, Constitutional Convention is called in May of 1787 in Philadelphia, future capital, or current capital. 12 of 13 states join. Rhode Island is absent because if they're not there, nothing can actually change. They're a small state. It works well for them. They're going to rewrite the government. One vote per state. They'll have multiple people there to represent, but only one vote per state. They keep it a secret because they don't want to admit the government is failing at this point. It's a brand new country. And majority will rule instead of a unanimous decision. The issues that they're going to have there is how to represent. Now, with representation, the Virginia plan is the large state plan, James Madison's. The New Jersey plan is the small state. And the compromise here will be the Great Compromise. Or the Connecticut Compromise. In order to bring those large state plans of what we bring into our House of Representatives together with our small state equal representation. So we end up with a bicameral Congress. Bicameral, 2 chambers, unlike the Articles of Confederation with 1. Now, House of Representatives is under this. It's population-based. Senate under New Jersey plan. Now, if you look at the Canvas page, I do have uploaded stuff about the Constitution to PowerPoint, so you'll be able to see much more clearly some of the things in there. And of course, as we look at the legislative branch, we'll know even more along with that. Now, only 9 of 13 are going to be needed to ratify. Some of the other compromises they make are like the 3/5 compromise to get northern states and southern states to agree. Slave trade compromise. They thought that it would just fade away. It was a problem that would just go away. The other groups that are arguing are the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Federalists want a strong government. You guys read a couple of segments out of the Federalist Papers. They're the group that they published in the newspaper, got a lot more readership. They published under the name Publius, which is the father of the Roman Republic. It was James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay who published under this. Anti-Federalists felt that it was making an empire, emperor, strong government, and they wrote under the names like Cato and Brutus, defenders of the Republic, people who wanted to kill the emperor. So, as they come to a compromise, the ultimate compromise that is made is the Bill of Rights. to the test, bring the note card / pamphlet that you made. You can use it. With the later amendments, there will only be a few of them, and we'll know them more as we get through the semester. Some of the other decisions made before the Constitution is passed is the Land Ordinance of 1785, which divides up townships and purchases for farmers and the like, agricultural. And then the next one, the Northwest Ordinance of 1789, is actually going to define statehood and how states can join. Early on, the United States is growing. We've talked about federalism. Looking at the Constitution, you've got a couple ways to interpret it, strict and loose. But as I said, just go through this on the Canvas page. The Electoral College, we choose people to vote for us. The preamble, you don't have to memorize it. Know that it's the introduction. It shows the goals, it shows the purposes, and look through it. Article 1, you're going to have legislative branch. 2, you're going to have the executive branch. 3, judicial branch. Within these, know things like that the legislative branch, of course, is Congress, it's bicameral, they can tax, they can borrow money. 2, the executive branch is commander-in-chief, he makes treaties and appoints officials. But appointing officials, there's a senatorial courtesy, one of those checks and balances that goes to the legislative branch. The impeachment process is also in the second article. The third is the judicial branch. Treason is defined. There won't be much more with that. 4, relationship between states. This is where we have interstate trade regulation. 5 is the amendment process. 4 ways to get there. Difficult to pass, that's why we only have 27 and 17 have come after the initial 6, over 200 years, 200 plus years. 6 is the supremacy clause. This is what makes our federal government the strongest and most important. 7 is ratification. Legislative branch, most importantly, what's one of the powers there is that Congress has the power to do whatever is necessary and proper. They can change lots of things. Implied powers are right there. Looking through the PowerPoint, there's several charts that I've made, Venn diagrams. Read over them. It will help you greatly. Remember, you can write anything you want on a 3x5 note card, one side. You're going to do a great job on this test. If you have any questions, you can email me or ask me right before class. That's all for review. We're going to look further at our Constitution in the next unit. We're going to start looking in depth at the legislative branch. Have an excellent weekend. Bye.